Roses are red, violets are blue, these rolls are sweet, and baking is too. Twisted with care, each petal unfolds, hiding a heart of jam in its folds. These rolls begin with a sweet stiff starter. To make it, add 15 grams of active starter, 40 grams of water, 80 grams of white flour, and 10 grams of granulated sugar to a 2-cup container. Mix until the dough becomes shaggy and hard to stir, then turn out onto a counter and knead for about 2 minutes to form a cohesive mass. I'm using bread flour here for reference, which absorbs a bit more water than all-purpose flour. Return to the container and cover. Store at 74 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit for about 12 hours or until the starter has tripled in size. Next, go ahead and cook and process your beets. For the most vibrant color, use fresh beets, which are processed and added to the dough right away. For a pinker or more brown color, you can use older beets and/or cook and process the beets in advance. Here, I'm just chopping the ends off the beets and boiling skin on with a bit of vinegar until they are fork tender, about 45 minutes. Acidity helps the beets retain their color better, so you can use vinegar or lemon juice. Once the beets are fork tender, you can easily peel off the skins. Puree the beets with just enough water to achieve a smooth consistency. Reserve 130 grams for the dough. Ankestroom recommends adding wet ingredients first, so that's what I'm doing here. But all of these ingredients can be added in any order that you choose. To the bowl of a stand mixer, add 125 grams of milk, 130 grams of cooked and processed red beets, and 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I'm adding the vitamin C straight to the beets here for the most contact with the beets, but I've also mixed it in with the dry ingredients before and the results were just fine. Next, add 300 grams of bread flour, 45 grams of sugar, 5 grams of salt, and the sweet stiff starter. At this point, I transfer the dough to my stand mixer to start mixing, but you can see that this dough is a bit dry without the butter. So I definitely do recommend adding the butter before kneading instead of after the dough has come together. Since there are only 4 tablespoons of butter in the whole recipe, it really isn't going to affect the gluten network too much. Knead the dough until it is a smooth, cohesive mass. This takes about 12 to 15 minutes in my Ankestroom stand mixer using my dough roller. You'll need to use the dough roller here and not the dough hook because this is a stiffer dough. When the dough is finished, you should be able to lift it up from the mixer with one hand, and the dough should come up smoothly from the bowl in one piece without tearing. For a KitchenAid, use the dough hook and knead for about 8 to 10 minutes, looking for the same signs of readiness. When the dough is finished kneading, give it a few folds on the counter to bring it back together, then transfer to a 2-quart container to double in size overnight, which takes about 10 hours at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the dough has completely filled the container, it's ready to shape. Shaping is probably the hardest part of this recipe, so watch closely. We're going to take our proofed dough, dump it out onto a lightly floured surface, and divide it into 3 sections. I weigh these sections, but I don't weigh anything else. Each section will be gently rolled into a log, then cut in half again to make 6 sections total. Each section will be smoothed out into a mostly even 5 or 6 inch cylinder, which is then cut into 6 equally sized pieces. It's okay if they aren't perfectly even because these are the petals of our roses, and I think a little bit of unevenness gives it a beautiful rustic look. For this part, I like to use just enough flour to keep the dough from sticking to the rolling pin or the counter. I may have used a little bit too much on some of these roses as the dough still needs to be able to stick to itself after rolling out. Roll each piece into a long oval and lay them in a straight line so that they overlap each other by 1/2 to 1 inch at the most. To the middle of your rose petal lineup, add a bit of your favorite jam, spread, or preserves. I used strawberry jam here, but the color did look kind of orange in the end. I usually use cherry preserves, which is beautiful, and I also think a blackberry jam would go well. Working from the bottom rose petal, roll everything up into a log. Now, this is actually 2 roses that we just made, so we'll split this in half with a bench knife and put each section flat side down into a greased muffin pan. Repeat this process to make 12 roses. The rest is easy. Just let the rolls rest again until they're very puffy and spilling over the top of their cups. I let them rest for about 5 more hours in my 70 degree Fahrenheit home. Last, bake the rolls at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes or until the internal temperature reaches at least 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, mix together 1/3 cup of powdered sugar with just enough milk, about 1.5 tablespoons, to create a thin glaze. Brush the glaze all over the hot rolls as soon as they come out of the oven, then transfer everything over to a cooling rack. And that's it. Sourdough rose jam rolls. Perfect for Valentine's Day or any special occasion. You can find even more information about this recipe on my website, linked in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more.